Seriously, someone starts up with a chainsaw just before I go with this? Well, greetings, citizens. Hello. I'm your professor, Chuck Deshays, and I'm speaking today. It's Friday afternoon, and I'm preparing a bit for a video for Canadian political geography. Okay, so I thought I'd shoot a fresh video for that. I welcome you to the class, and I look forward to seeing everyone on the 4th of August. But in the meantime, I thought I'd go ahead and start with this. We already have a video that discusses the physical geography of Canada, and physical geography tells you what the land shapes are, a little bit like what the climate is like in the different regions, and also, most importantly, what is there, what can people do to survive on that particular piece of land, be it fish or mine or not. And also, it's a great inhibitor geography. So what we're also going to look at today in the political geography is what do people do, get a little sense, a little flavor of what life might be like for the people who reside in these various provinces and territories across Canada. So before I do that, I want to mention one thing. Back in, back when Canada was first being settled by Europeans, they were looking for what can we use here? What is here? What's good that we can use? Fish, beaver, the fur, anyways. Not so much the meat. So these things had value. These are what we would call raw materials, raw goods that Canada can export. And Canada has a history, and it also has a reputation as being an exporter of raw materials, be it fish, be it water. 21st century, 21st century gold, water, oil, minerals, things of this nature, wheat. And there are a number of Canadians who are employed in factors of that economy who do that. But I should also hasten to add that that is not all that consists of the economy of Canada. You have a great number, a vast majority of people who work in what we call the service sectors, jobs like you and I have as teachers, or working for the police or the fire department or in the hospitals, okay, or working for the banks or working for retail outlets, those that survive this terrible, terrible pandemic. So the economy has changed, and when you look at the economy of Canada, in a lot of respects, it reflects the economy of the United States, except it has a bit more of this extractive raw material element to its portfolio, if you will. Okay, so what we're going to do right now, so I'm going to make my way working from the east coast of Canada all the way across to the west, and then we'll go north and we'll finish up with the territories in that region. Okay, just basically to give you a bit of a flavor for what life is like and what do people do there. Okay, the first place we're going to come across is Newfoundland. I think I mentioned in the physical geography that in about the year 1000, the Vikings came down, and they and eventually other nations and other groups would come and fish off of Newfoundland, and so that became the very first place to do. When Jacques Cartier came over, the very first place he landed at first, Newfoundland, and then wound his way down to the St. Lawrence. So you would think, well, Newfoundland's been around forever, so it must have been like one of those original Canadian colonies or provinces. No. Actually, it was the last. It is the last province to join Canadian Confederation. They didn't join until 1949, and it took a couple of votes to decide whether or not Newfoundland was going to become part of Canada, remain part of Great Britain as a colony, or maybe become independent in and of itself. Okay, so you had that choice, and it was kind of interesting, especially after the Second World War. You see a lot of areas gain their independence. A lot of countries gained their independence. India, Israel, and then of course Newfoundland's like, again, Great Britain is flat ass busted. They don't have any money after the Second World War. They can't support colonies that much anymore. So it's like unload, 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 unload. Do whatever. Maybe you should join Canada. Have you considered Canada? That might be a good place for people like you. So anyways, they have a vote, and by the narrowest of margins, they decide to join Canada in 1949. Okay. Population there's about 500,000 people who live in Newfoundland, and that is about the same as the number that lived there in the 1970s. It's been fairly flat. Why? New immigrants don't go to Newfoundland. They don't go to a lot of the maritime provinces, frankly. Why? Employment opportunities are limited. For a long time, is in the physical geography bit, we mentioned that fishing, and of course fishing made sense. That's why people came in the first place. Fishing made sense. Okay, we'll do the fishing. We're surrounded by water. Yeah, I guess fishing makes sense. So that's fine and dandy. However, one important element, the cod fishery, has been sidelined for almost 30 years now. In 1992, the Canadian government announced a moratorium on fishing for cod, in and around the Newfoundland and the Grand Banks area. And of course, the fishermen, and there's some really interesting clips of the fisheries minister who was from Newfoundland. He's dead now. But he was actually like hollering at the fishermen. He's like, well, I didn't take all the goddamn fish out of the water. It's like he was hollering back at them, because they were hollering at him for closing down their way of life. And automatically, 20,000 people lost their jobs. And now it may not sound like a really big number in the grand scheme of things, but you got to remember their population is about 500,000. So 5% of the population, and then all the offshoot industries, the canneries, and things of that nature. All these people are also affected. So I mean, it was a devastating blow, and it was a moratorium. And it's like, all right, well, give it a rest, and maybe they'll come back. And maybe they won't. It's been almost 30 years. That was 1992. So what else do people do in Newfoundland? What do they do now? Well, there still is some other fishing that is available to them. Other fish are still not endangered yet, but they're keeping a sharper eye on things now than they did with the cod. And they knew about it. The thing is, there's actually a book that a gentleman by the name of Mark Kurlansky wrote that's entitled Cod, and it explains how the central role cod played in the development of North America, especially in places like Newfoundland, and also other maritime provinces in New England as well. Anyways, it was an interesting little read if you ever get a chance. Anyways, so there are other fishing. There also are, there's a deal of forestry on the west part of the province. Also, given its remote location, it's difficult to get to. Yeah, remember, Newfoundland has its own time zone. All right, we are in the Eastern time zone here in Quebec, in Montreal, and Quebec. You go further east, you get to the Atlantic time zone, where the maritime provinces and a small section of Quebec is also in that Atlantic time zone. And then half an hour beyond that, you have Newfoundland. Okay, so if I'm doing this at 5 o'clock in the afternoon, it's already 6:30 in Newfoundland. Okay, okay. It's one of those quirks of Newfoundland life. Let's see what else is going on there. Again, service sectors, hospitals, schools have taken up some of the slack. Tourism is a very big thing. for Newfoundland. And the only problem you have with tourism is that you require tourists. Tourists are kind of tough to come by, especially in an era of COVID. I mean, maybe people can travel around in Canada, but from my observations, it seems like people are mostly sticking close to home. Can't go to the US, border closed. No one knows when that's going to open up. You know, you can go to Europe, but people are still kind of, suspicious. They don't, it's not that there's anything wrong with the Europeans. They're just not sure about this virus thing. So it's like, no, we'll stick here, sticking close to home. So that's not good news for tourism operators and places like Newfoundland, which are a little bit out of the way. Okay. So it's a struggling province. Newfoundland is always a struggling province. Even it's only Newfoundland luck that would actually have us. A couple of decades ago, they discovered, hey, we have oil just offshore here. We could do that. And they started to. And of course, anyone who follows the price of oil will know that about, was it 2014, end of 2014, oil prices just plummeted. They dropped, and they pretty much have stayed low, though sometimes we don't notice it so much at the pumps, do we? But anyways, the price of oil has dropped precipitously. And of course, now Newfoundland's like, well, shoot, Sherlock, that didn't work either. So Newfoundland has historically had this, whatever the Canadian unemployment rate, if the Canadian unemployment rate is like 8%, you can pretty much guarantee it's double in Newfoundland. Okay. 15, 16%, it's not uncommon. When times are tougher in Canada, if it's hit 10, 11%, they're probably looking at 20. So it's an economically depressed area, which is why people don't want to move there. Who wants to move there? Kids grow up, there aren't much to do there. There aren't any jobs, very good jobs that they can do. They move. Okay. So that's Newfoundland. I've gone on a bit long about Newfoundland. I just want to mention a couple of other things about them. Moose, many moose. They have moose over there. I have a partner who traveled there several years ago, and they have a sign on the side of the road that keeps a running tally of the moose car fatalities. And they're not talking about the number of dead moose. And that number keeps going. So there are moose is an issue there. Okay. They're majestic creatures. I don't know if you've ever seen one, but they really are. They're really impressive. But you don't want to be running across one, at dark or whatever it is, or at any time really, because I don't know what kind of vehicle you drive, but more than likely you're going to come in second best in that kind of collision. Okay. Also, there's something called screech. There's a tradition, screeched, where you have to, kiss a cod and drink this really nasty rum, take a shot of that, and then you've been considered to be screeched. Okay, so this is like a Newfoundland tradition. Okay. Also, there's things they call Newfie jokes. Again, they're similar to what used to be called, like, you would take an ethnic group and fill in blank joke. Well, now Newfie is the Canadian equivalent of that pejorative. So the Newfie joke is becoming less of a thing, I would imagine, in these times. Okay. All right. So we'll move on from Newfoundland. Bye. And we're on to New Brunswick. Okay. New Brunswick, it's a slightly smaller physically area than Newfoundland, but it has about a 50% greater population. Has about 750,000 people live there. Again, this number has been fairly stagnant for the last 4 or 5 decades. Again, it's one of those areas traditionally relied a bit on fishing, less so perhaps in Newfoundland, but still fishing was a very major industry there. Lumber industry, very big. Some mining takes place there. But again, a lot of these things are taking place less than they used to. And even those that do require less people to do that. Machines do a lot of this stuff now. So service industry it is, And again, if your offspring, your kids, or you or your kids get an education, you're not going to stick around if you can avoid it, because it's going to be hard to find jobs unless you find one as a teacher, as a policeman, as a in the healthcare field, et cetera, et cetera. Okay. New Brunswick, capital Fredericton, I've been there just the one time that I can recall, and very quaint little town of about 55,000 people. I went to visit their provincial legislature on a Saturday, and they didn't have tours or anything. They didn't think anyone would want to see it. So we were shooed away. So not happening in Fredericton, but that's the capital. And the thing about New Brunswick is it is Canada's only official bilingual province. By that, I mean that if I'm someone who resides in New Brunswick and I want to go and get some sort of government services, I have the right to be serviced in either French or English, at a provincial level. Okay. If I want to go to get a driver's license and I want to be serviced in French and or English, I have that right. Okay. And that's the only province. Now, I know Canada is an officially bilingual country, but that is for federal government services, not anything to do with the provinces or with the cities or anything like that. So New Brunswick is unique in this regard, okay? And the thing about it is that might change. In 2018, 18, one of those years, minority government was elected, a conservative minority government was elected, and it's held in power by a very small political party that has 3 members in the legislature. And so that helps give the Conservatives enough to maintain an overall majority, the 2 parties. But they are very ultra-conservative party, and they're anti-French party, and they would very much like to see New Brunswick not be open, not be bilingual for French services. So they haven't gotten around to pushing that point yet, because I don't think the government really wants to do that. But at some point in time, they may have to either bite the bullet and have an election, or basically tell this party to go pound salt and hope for the best. So we'll see. Really not much else to say about New Brunswick. Again, yeah, Newfoundland without the glitz. Okay, move on. We'll move a little bit further east and south slightly, and that's Nova Scotia. Okay, a little bit larger population, almost 950,000 people. There has been some growth there. If any immigrants are going to go to the Maritime provinces, they're more than likely going to go to Nova Scotia. And if they're going to go to Nova Scotia, they're more than likely going to go to Halifax. Halifax, capital city. It's kind of like, if you want to consider it like the Boston of, the Maritimes, because it's the city there. It has, it's a big city for maritime considerations. 400,000 is a big city for them, and it's also a modern city. It has big in the technological field, the computer gaming field, video stuff, things of that nature, things that I almost know nothing about, but my kids sure do. That sort of thing. Well, Halifax is a place. If you're hip and you're in tune with things like that, Halifax is a place to go, right? Used to be a big shipbuilding area, especially in Halifax. Why? It's right on the coast, right? Right on the coast, and especially during wars and everything like that, ships were being built, pretty regularly, sent off. Of course, nowadays it is more of a service-oriented economy. Again, a lot of universities in and around Halifax. The rest of the province, if you go a little bit further up the coast, a place called Cape Breton Island, used to be a huge coal mining area there. Again, mining for coal is it's a dwindling trade, if you want to call it that. And again, people are being replaced by machines wherever possible there. I mean, they've had a number of like mine collapses over the years and things of that nature. So it's a dangerous occupation, and it's going away. Okay, I mentioned Halifax earlier. I mentioned during wars and things of that nature. There was something called the Halifax explosion. It took place during the First World War in 1917. A munitions boat collided with an oil tanker in Halifax Harbor. And it was one of those things. This has happened to, I'm sure, to everyone here. You're walking either on a sidewalk or you're walking in a hallway, and someone's coming in the opposite direction. And so I'll go to the left. Then the other person goes the opposite direction. So you're kind of like in each other's way again. So you try to move the other way, and you're still in each other's way. You've done this before. Well, this is what these ships did. Unfortunately, these ships are not able to move as quickly out of the way or stop or anything like that. And so, fire breaks out, and then people from the town gather to see this huge fire taking place in the bay, and then kaboom. I mean, really, kaboom. I mean, 6,000 people dead instantly. Thousands others would die in the ensuing days and weeks. Up until the atomic bomb at Hiroshima, this was the largest man-made explosion in human history. So Halifax is famous for that. So they've got that going for that. And again, I mean, I had a professor at Potsdam State who wrote his whole dissertation on this. So he was very well versed in it, as were we as time went on. Okay. So anyways, that's a little flavor for Nova Scotia. Moving on, we move to Prince Edward Island. Prince Edward Island. It's the smallest physically and geographically by a long shot in terms of provinces. There's 140,000 people that live there, and there is, again, service industry dominates in terms of government, government workers, teachers, hospital workers, things of that nature, healthcare, police. I don't know if you need that many police in PEI. Anyways, in terms of what do they actually produce, they produce potatoes. They're well famous. They're like the Idaho of Canada, if you will, because they produce potatoes there. The soil is rich enough for that. So they're able to grow potatoes there. And of course, again, Prince Edward Island, hello, you're an island. So you're going to be doing some fishing as well. So that's another industry that is still taking place today. The brunt of their industry, their economy, a lot of it rests on tourism. And again, in this particular era, it's probably not doing all that well this summer, okay? And who knows how long it'll be before it comes back. People visit there. The water there is supposedly quite warm, in and around those islands for that part of the world is quite, I can tolerate this. This isn't so bad. And also they have, I don't know if anyone's here familiar with Anne of Green Gables. It's a fictional character, but again, Prince Edward Island has basically an Anne of Green Gables based economy in terms of tourism, where this fictional character's home was in Prince Edward Island, and so they set up, parts of the island to be her home, sort of thing. So, and turn it into a tourist spot. Okay. And there's been many incantations of that, from the book to the TV series to movies to everything, to another TV series, to another TV series, to another TV series. So there's always something about Anne of Green Gables. Okay. Again, PEI, they don't even bother spelling it out. So there we go, Prince Edward Island. Let's see what else I want to slip to. Before I get into Quebec, I'm going to take a little sip of Agua Fria. There we go. Quebec. All right, this is where I live. I'm a American citizen, but I reside permanently here in Canada. And right now I'm in The city of Montreal, okay, where half of the 8 million people lived in and around Montreal. So 8 million people in Quebec, roughly 4 million people live in the greater Montreal area, okay? The thing that if you're not familiar, have not been to Quebec, first thing that's going to strike you is those people sure speak awful funny English. And that's right, we do. It's what we would call French. Okay, we're going to find out, especially in the history section, why there is so much French spoken, not only in Quebec but also in other parts of Canada as well. As we've already mentioned, New Brunswick. You're going to find that parts of Ontario, in Manitoba, and as you go further west, there are decidedly fewer French speakers, but they're still there. Okay, so you'll understand the bilingual nature of the country a bit more. But in Quebec, the official language is French, and it has been since 1974. I think it has, yeah, 1974, yeah. And then was more codified in 1977, but we'll get into that a little bit later on. So it's a huge province. This is a very big province. This is the largest province in all of Canada. I mean, for those of you who are not familiar, Quebec has a couple of times gone to the polls to decide whether or not they really want to stick around and stay as part of Canada, or whether they want to form their own country. And people over the years, students when I teach this course, have always said, well, it's so small. Why would they think they could become a nation into itself? It's like, well, it's almost 3 times the size of France physically. Population wise, no, it's about 8 million people, but with the size, there's a great deal of Quebec. Quebec stretches from pretty much right here. Montreal is pretty much about the southern tip of it. There's another half hour to the border, southern border, but it goes far north. It goes way far north. It goes past Hudson's Bay and James Bay, way far north. So it is the largest, province by a long shot. And that's why it's also been very important for the rest of Canada to keep Quebec in there, because if Quebec were to leave, that would create a very huge hole in our country. I mean, it's a significant part of the landmass, and if it was just another country, it'd create all sorts of different problems. Okay, so when you have this kind of landmass, this kind of huge territory, you're talking a huge variation in what people do for a living, and you can break it down roughly into like an rural urban sort of split. If you're in a urbanized area, you're in a Montreal, you're in Laval, you're in Quebec City, most of the jobs there are probably going to be, and they are, they're going to be service sector jobs, they're going to be healthcare jobs, they're going to be government jobs, they're going to be, professional jobs of some sort. I'm not saying that we don't. I mean, we have, there are some, well, can't even grow your own weed here, so I guess that's not even, you can't even be a local farmer in that respect. But these are it's an urbanized area, right? Once you get offside the island of Montreal, and the further out you get, things become much more agricultural very quickly. And so you have things like, lumber industry. You have lumber industry is a big deal. You have, growing of various crops. They do grow crops here. In fact, when this was first, being settled, this is where they used to grow wheat, in this area right here. Here, and just to the other side of the south, what they call it, South Shore of Montreal. That was a wheat field for a long period of time. Okay, so this was an agricultural area at one point, no longer. But the rest of the province, it is. You have blueberries is a big industry, maple syrup, huge in Quebec, right? So you have these various, so you have this divide of economy, right? And that makes sense because it's just a huge thing. Lumber industry, pulp and paper. Perhaps one of the most renowned things in Quebec is the hydroelectric power. It's a government-run outfit. government has, flooded huge tracts of northern Quebec to manipulate water to come into one area to create hydroelectric power, which they then use here in Quebec to drive their economy. But also they sell this power to Midwest, to the states in the Northeast. And so, people in, Indiana might be using hydropower that's coming out of Quebec, shipping down from the lines. Okay, so there's a very vast, the economy is quite, varied. Let's put it that way. As is the climate. You hear Montreal, summertime, miserable, hot, humid, because you're surrounded by water, right? It's an island, right? And so that's one thing. But the further north you go an hour north from here, it's a different story. It's a few degrees cooler, and then further up you go, it gets considerably cooler to those areas where you almost get above the tree line, sort of thing. So you're going to have a huge disparity in climates and things of that nature. Okay. I mentioned hydroelectric. That's the thing that, spins the economic engine, supposedly, here in Quebec. And so that's one thing that we'll talk about later about. There is a fairly significant Quebec section in this course. We talk about a little bit how Quebec nationalism came to be and what were the driving forces behind that. One thing I want to mention right now is something that the Quebec government came up with about a year or so ago, almost. And when you look back on it now, it's almost ironic. They have a large number of immigrants that do come into Quebec, but if you do come into Quebec, you have to be okayed not only by the federal government in Ottawa to become a permanent resident in Canada, but you also have to be okayed by the provincial government in Quebec. This is the only province that has that. It doesn't pass muster with the other provinces. Typically, the people who operate the government of Quebec like to see people from French-speaking countries come in here. Some of those French-speaking countries practice religions that are not. I'm trying to be diplomatic about this. They're Muslim. Okay, some of them are Muslims that are coming in, and from these French-speaking countries, and they're wearing the traditional headscarf and everything like that. And last year, when things were, this was a big thing in Quebec, they passed a law where you basically ban face coverings for, as what they called it, a secularization bill. So, but basically it was clearly aimed at this particular group of immigrants who had come into Quebec, who, continued to practice their religion. And if that meant having a niqab or face covering or something like that, and you wanted to use public transit, or if you wanted to use some sort of government services, or you wanted to apply for a job with the government, you can't. Okay, and so now, fast forward to this year, where now the government is in fact requiring everyone to wear face masks. And the irony is, it's kind of sweet, actually, in some respects, when you're looking back at it. It's like, okay, well, that was then kind of rule, eh? Okay, but again, we're going to go a lot more into Quebec, over the next few weeks. So I'll deal with that Quebec, and then we'll move on to Ontario. Okay, Ontario. Again, this is a very good-sized province. This is the second largest province in terms of size, but in terms of people, it's number one by a pretty considerable amount. About 14 million out of 38 million and change that live in Canada reside in the province of Ontario. So that's about 40%. So can you imagine if there was a state in the US that had 40% of the people? 40% of the population in the US states would be about 150 million people in one state. And can you imagine how that would alter things like representation in government bodies and things of that nature? Okay, so it's something to keep in mind. Climate, varied as well. In terms of economy, again, this runs along a rural-urban split. In the southern section of Ontario, we have the largest city in all of Canada, that's Toronto. with all the amalgamations that have gone on, the population of Toronto is now just about 6 million people. Okay, so it's a really significant city in that sense, in terms of population. And it's almost half the population of the entire province. In Toronto, what people do for a living, again, service sector jobs, professional jobs, healthcare, teaching, universities, things of that nature. Also, there's a stretch of what they used to call the Golden Horseshoe. It would run from just about Oshawa, Ontario, which is about an hour and 15 or an hour and 20 minutes if there's no traffic on the road. And there's always traffic on the road. Typically nowadays, it takes you an hour and 15 minutes to go 85 feet. So Toronto's kind of rough in that respect. But from Oshawa all the way down through Toronto, all the way down to the Niagara area, that used to be what they call the Golden Horseshoe. That was a very industrial area as well. A lot of cars. A lot of American companies have what they call branch plants in southeastern, southwestern Ontario, right along that shore, right along the Lake Erie shoreline. And so it was Lake Erie, Lake Ontario as well. So that was a very lucrative area. Over the last 30 years, it has declined considerably through globalization, free trade deals and things of that nature. And again, just through basic automation, where you don't need as many people to work the assembly line, or to work in the auto parts section. There are just fewer human needs there. So economy has shifted over time. And again, a lot of people think, well, I guess I better do something else, go back to school, do something else, because this is not going to last forever, and it hasn't. Okay. So that's the southern part of the province. Again, as you move further north, you move into cottage country. You get things like wine is a huge thing in Ontario. Who knew? But wine is a huge thing in Ontario, also in British Columbia. Makes more sense there, but Ontario has their own wine, as they do in Quebec actually too now, like ice wines. But further north you go, again, you're running into a lot of lumber, a lot of timber, a lot of mining areas. Silver mines, gold mines on occasion, uranium, big, especially during Second World War, copper. So there's a huge, number of jobs that are in Canada's, as you're moving further up north in Ontario. But again, these are jobs that are requiring fewer and fewer people all the time. Okay. So service-based economy, filling in for now. Anyways, the national capital is also located. It's Ottawa, in case you're not familiar with it. I'm not sure if many of you have been to Ottawa. It's a lovely city, very clean for the most part, very nice. I did spend a considerable time doing research up there. Very, very nice city, and House of Commons, and that's where all the government center is, right there. It's really nice. So if you haven't had a chance to visit Ottawa, I was going to say you might want to visit it sometime in the near future, but the House of Commons is actually being, what they call, they're doing a renovation. And I think they're only on like year 2 or 3 of a 10-year renovation. So it may be a while. They have a temporary house that they're using right now for their governmental meetings, but yeah, the main one is shut down for right now. Also, the Prime Minister's residence is also being renovated, so he's staying at a hotel nearby. So, and also spending some time at a Governor General's residence, where I guess someone broke into got close to the Governor General's residence, and we'll explain who the Governor General is in the next section as well. But it's the Queen's representative in Canada. That's still a thing. Okay, so just to let you know that. Okay, but again, Ottawa, a lot of museums there, a lot of reasonably priced museums. If you haven't had a chance, I would still recommend it. And it's also great. This is what my brother and I used to do all the time. Go up there, rent bikes, and just ride all over Ottawa. Okay, You know, they've got nice hills. They've got, and you drive and take the bridge and go. And Ottawa became capital of Canada because of where it's located. It's on the Ontario side, but it's right against the Quebec border. I mean, there is a bridge right across the way, and you can take that bridge. You can walk it, you can bike it, you can take your car across, and you're in Quebec. Boom, that's it. You know, it's just like that. Queen Victoria selected Ottawa back in 1858, I do believe, to be the capital of Canada. And there was a great debate about where the capital of Canada should be. You know, Montreal thought they should be capital. Quebec City thought it should be the capital. Kingston, Ontario said, no, should be here. Toronto thought, no. We're a growing outfit. We're going to be the king one day, and you're going to find out. This should be where it is. This is the center of the universe. And that's part of the thing about Toronto. A lot of Canadians kind of have this, you know, it's kind of like New York City in a sense, have a love-hate relationship with Toronto, minus the love part, because it's, you know, because Toronto and Torontonians often give the impression that they believe they are in fact the center of Canada, and the rest of the country kind of resents that. So there we go with that. Moving on, heading out west. Okay, so we had our 4 original provinces. We mentioned New Brunswick, Nova Scotia, Quebec, Ontario. Those were the 4 original provinces. You know, then the next one to join after Confederation was Manitoba. Okay, Manitoba has a little over 1 million people there, 1.3 million. Half of them live in the one city of Winnipeg. And you see this happens a lot in Canada. Population of the province is X, and their largest city has half of it. Okay, and this happens quite a bit. Okay, Manitoba, generally an agricultural province outside of Winnipeg. Winnipeg is a government town. It's a city. It's the government center there. It's a provincial seat is in Winnipeg. You also have universities and healthcare facilities of highest order in the province located in Winnipeg. So again, this is where it all takes place. Outside of that, it's a lot of grain. You have a lot of what's the other one they do there? Oh, cattle. Yes, they do cattle there. Very big, and it makes sense. Where is it located? It's right across from the Dakotas, right across from North Dakota there. So what happens on one side of the border? The border sometimes means something, like right now it means you can't go across from one country to the next. But also other times it means like, well, yeah, there's a border there, but we're doing the same thing on this side of the border as they're doing on the same thing on the other side of the border as well. If they're farming in North Dakota, they're cattle ranching in North Dakota, they're also doing it in Manitoba. Okay. So this is, you know, that's their livelihood, bread and butter. They also have a bit of a tourism sector there. Kind of a tough place to draw tourists because the climate there can be, I would say, some of the harshest in all of Canada because of the extremities. You get extreme heat in the summertime. Heat comes down, you know, there's nothing to block it. There's not much in the way of trees there. It's a pretty flat area. So nothing to break the heat. The heat's coming in, that's it, no shade. Not much in the way of shade. No, I'm not saying they don't have trees there. It's just that they don't have an abundance of trees there until you get to the far northern part of Manitoba. So, and also it sits outside the Canadian Shield, which means when cold weather comes in, the cold weather comes down and there's nothing to stop it. The cold weather comes down around and it blows right through, you know, most of Manitoba, especially Winnipeg. And there's a Canadian comedian who does a bit who talks about how in certain times of the year, it is colder in Winnipeg than it is on the average surface temperature in Mars. And he goes, I'm not a scientist or anything, but I'm pretty sure the Earth is closer to the sun than Mars is. How is this possible? So it's very hot, very cold in the wintertime, but the summer can be very oppressively hot. as well. And in the between, you have a spring where once that hard freeze, finally, spring has come. What else is coming is flooding, because when snow's melting and the ground can't absorb it, floods. And they get it practically every year. A place called Red River happens along Manitoba, happens in North Dakota as well. Again, floods don't really pay attention to borders. It's like we're flooding. Okay, that's the way it is. Okay. Let's see. What else do we have about Manitoba? Not much. Okay. Move on. Heading out west. We're still in what we consider the prairie provinces. Manitoba starts it. Then you go into Saskatchewan. All right. Saskatchewan, again, 1.1 million people. Again, fairly stagnant, as is Manitoba's population. Saskatchewan is a landlocked province. Okay. Manitoba would be, except it does have access to parts of Hudson's Bay and things of that nature. Saskatchewan is a landlocked province. It has lakes inside, but no, it's just landlocked. It's a sunny place. It's dry there. So why don't people want to live there? Traditionally, it was again, it has a very harsh climate as well, can be harsh, like Manitoba. It's great for growing grain. Wheat was king for the longest time. And that's great when the wheat grows. But in an economy where about 90% of the people worked in that particular industry, when you had things like the Dust Bowl of the Great Depression take place, it was just absolutely devastating in that part of Canada. Saskatchewan, people wore the same clothes for a decade, and it's not because they didn't grow bigger or smaller or anything like that. It's because they couldn't afford new clothes. They couldn't, this is where people started getting the thing where wearing bags on your bags on your feet and things of that nature for shoes. It was that rough. It was probably the hardest hit place in all of Canada by far, and maybe all of North America. So it's, they've seen a lot there. Okay. In the last 10 or 15 years, obviously, after the Second World War, they became much more service oriented, much more inclined to have healthcare needs, healthcare workers, government workers, teachers, police, fire, that sort of thing. That's still the case in a good part of Saskatchewan, but there is still a large element of farms. The problem is the farms have changed. The number of farmers has shrunk dramatically. The size of the farms have grown exponentially. So farming is big there, but again, far fewer people involved in it. Okay. Last 15, 20 years, they also discovered in the southwest corner of Saskatchewan, hey, we have some oil here. We could be rich, just like some of these other provinces that have oil. Okay, and that works fine until the price of oil dropped, which it did in 2014. And so then it's like, no, it's still there. I mean, the demand for oil is still there. The oil is still there. But it's also one of those industries where you can start seeing that there may be an end date on this. Okay, so that's Saskatchewan, really. Let's see. One interesting point, we'll get to this more in the political science. The first socialist government elected in North America, elected in Saskatchewan in a landslide back in 1944. And actually, they were not elected. They stayed in power for 20 years, kept getting reelected every 4 years, democratic socialists, as it were. So yeah, and they're still a fixture on the political scene in Saskatchewan today. Okay. And again, we'll talk more about that in a couple of weeks. Moving further west, we're in Alberta. Okay, Alberta bound has about 4 million people. Okay, why? Well, they're a bit of a people magnet, and they have been for about 40 years. They were people magnet. People were moving to Alberta because it was a growing area. Why was it growing? After the Second World War, huge deposits of oil were discovered in Alberta. And so American firms and British firms moved in, and they just and the government collected royalty checks from these outfits, and they pumped, and people in Alberta, this became the place where you could go get a job, not maybe have a great education, but you could make $150,000 a year working out in the oil fields outside of Fort McMurray. It's like, great, fantastic. And again, before that, it was a province that was a prairie province, largely dependent on wheat and some tourism. But now with the oil came, it's like, so that's why Alberta was so wealthy. They actually passed out things in the 1990s where they were passing out prosperity checks. They were giving like $4,000 checks to every family in Alberta because we have so much money, we're going to give you the money back. They have no sales tax, no provincial sales tax in Alberta. It's the only province that doesn't have a sales tax. Well, we don't need it because we have so much oil money. What happens if the oil, isn't desired like it was, or the price drops significantly? What happens then? Well, don't worry about that. Don't worry about that. Debbie Downer. No one likes you. That's why no one likes you, because you're such a downer. Like I said, 2014, the price dropped, and it stayed low, and it has not rebounded. And Alberta is in a very tough situation right now. Okay, oil rules, and their government is sort of like, they're doubling down on oil. They're trying to expand the capacity. They're pushing to build more pipelines, which means they're going to drill more, produce more, and ship more, which means pipelines. And they're going through provinces, they're going through native lands, which means this is upsetting a lot of environmental people, environmental concerns, the climate change folks who, thinking that producing more oil is probably not a good way to help combat climate change. Are on the opposite side. The federal government is also saying we're trying to, cap our emissions of carbon dioxide. Awful tough when you're wanting to produce more oil. All right. So this creates problems with native groups, environmental groups, other provinces. Oh, by the way, they want to ship that oil through the province of British Columbia to the west coast, where there'll be a float of tankers taking it off to Asia. Now, if you're the premier of British Columbia, it's like, well, wait a second. You guys are shipping that oil, so you're getting the money for that. You're shipping it through our land. Anything gets spilled. Oh, and by the way, it will spill. They always do. Or if there's a tanker, accident in the ports outside there, you're going to have another, Exxon Valdez sort of thing, in a populated area, blah, blah, blah. I'm on the hook for that. You guys are getting rich. The people in Asia are making out great. We're stuck. So they don't like it. And so there's been a bit of a very bitter war between Alberta and British Columbia. And the federal government's kind of like on both sides. They've actually said, well, this pipeline thing, boy, it really goes against our desire to control climates. But we're going to help you build those pipelines, Alberta. It's like, and BCE is going, what? You're doing what? Yeah, because an American company said, with all this problems going on, we're out. So the Canadian government bought out the American company that wanted to build a pipeline or expand the pipeline. So now the Canadian federal government owns the rights to this pipeline, and they want to run it through native land. Okay, it's going to get weird. Okay. So anyways, all of this means that Alberta's feeling very frustrated, though. Yes, there's pipelines there, but they're meeting a lot of resistance from a lot of folks. And so they're thinking, screw you guys. What if we were our own country? So it's just not Quebec that has mentioned separation. And Alberta does this every so often when the price of oil gets weak and they realize how dependent they are on it. They say, well, then we're out of here. We want out. It's like, so now we're hearing some rumblings out west about that once again. Okay, just to let you know. Okay. Then we're moving to the last province, which is British Columbia. Again, we mentioned them just a few minutes ago. Again, has a little bit more in terms of population, about 4.5 million people live there. Half live in Vancouver. Okay. British Columbia is unique in the sense because it's a very English area, but it also has a lot of immigrants, especially in the Vancouver area. And most of those immigrants have immigrated from Asian countries, from China, from Hong Kong, from Vietnam, and things of that nature, places of that nature. So it has a different flavor to it altogether. Okay. Also places like India. Again, you see that a lot in Toronto as well, but Chinese is spoken by 10% of the people who live in British Columbia. 5% Punjabi. Okay. Climate is varied there. The interior of British Columbia is probably some of the nicest area you're going to find in Canada. It is dry there. It is warm. And it has a very brief, I was like, oh, hello, winter. Are you around for long today? Yeah, no, we're just going to be here for a couple of weeks. Oh, thank you. Then move on. And they do. So it's a very nice area. Once you get outside of that, well, things get a little bit, snowier, a little bit colder. That's why, you get up in the mountains, you're in the Rockies. So things are going to get a little bit cooler. You're on the coastal mountains as well. So there's a couple of mountain ranges, one on the east part of British Columbia, and on the west part, you have the coastal mountains. And so in between, it's a great forest area, great area for forestry, provided a number of people with jobs for a number of decades. That too has become mechanized, where you are needing fewer people. Okay. But lumber is a major extractive industry. Some mining goes on there. They have natural gas places in British Columbia, which is also causing problems with their own native people as well. So it's a very complicated area. Okay. Along the West Coast, when you were in the capital city, oh, by the way, not Vancouver, it's Victoria. Okay. Victoria, they call it Victoria, named after the British Queen of said name. Also, they find that people who go to Victoria say that the people there are more English than the people in Great Britain. So it's a very genteel kind of place. And again, along the whole West Coast, be it Vancouver or Victoria, moving up the coast a little bit, your weather is moderated a bit by the fact that you're on an ocean. So you're not going to have the severe heat that you would get, or severe cold that you would get without being next to that body of water. So it moderates it, kind of like being in, Great Britain, I suppose. Okay. You have the Pacific Ocean to keeping you warm. Like I mentioned, lumber is still a big thing there, some mining, but again, service industries are becoming much more important to the economy. Government workers, healthcare, you know the drill by now. Okay. Let's see. Oh yeah, also there's fishing there. Of course there's fishing there because you're right on the coast. You've heard of Pacific salmon and things of that nature. And again, that's part of the reason why they don't want pipelines going through there, oil tankers mucking up their ports, and also kind of like screwing up the natural habitat of the salmon and other fisheries that are dependent on using those waters to traverse along the west coast of Canada. Okay. Also, for the last 25 years or so, you may not realize it, Vancouver has been like the #3 spot in the world for Hollywood to shoot television shows and movies. Aside from Hollywood and New York, Vancouver is the #3 spot. So if you're interested in getting in the television or film industry, a lot of people head out to Vancouver. Okay. A friend of mine here in Montreal, her daughter works out there. And she also works in Seattle. She also works in Hollywood. for the COVID thing, and now we're not quite sure where she might be. But again, this is a very big part of their economy as well. Again, we'll talk a little bit more about this later. Government does extend a hand to people who want to come in and use their facilities, and offer generous incentives to do so. So that's one of those things that's a little bit quirky about British Columbia. It's a place where people go to shoot films and TVs and TV shows and stuff like that. Okay. Oh, I want to finish up with the North. I can't forget the North. The North. Lots of land, few people. Thank you very much. There are 3 territories. On the west, you have Yukon. East of that, you have the Northwest, which I know it doesn't make a lot of sense, but it's what happens. And then to the east of that, you have something called Nunavut, which is the latest territory. It was carved up, the Northwest Territories were carved into 2, and Nunavut was the largest part of it. And so you now have 3 territories. They are governed, they have an internal government structure, and they also are governed by Parliament. So that's what separates them a bit from a province, okay? Again, huge land masses, each of these territories. Each of them has a population of roughly 30 to 40,000 people. Most of the people who reside there are indigenous people, Inuit in the case of Nunavut, and Inuit, and also in terms of Northwest, and then also a mixture of First Nations and Inuit as you head further west, going through Yukon. Okay, what do people do for a living up there? Aside from which it was warmer, what do? They sit there and say, well, there are jobs. There are mining jobs there. Of course, Yukon was a Klondike, part of the Klondike gold rush. So that's where that all came to be. And so that is there's gold mining, there's silver mining, there's other minerals that are mined there, diamonds are mined there, and they are open and closed depending on the market. If the market for a particular metal is high, for copper or bauxite or is high, whatever, then the mines open up. If it goes down, then they close them up again. Okay. The number 1 employer across all of these territories is in fact the government, federal government, the territorial government, but basically government administered programs, things of that nature, administrators. And also, by the way, as you can probably figure, these things are way north. Most of it's north of the tree line, Arctic Circle area. You're getting kind of cold. It's cold there. And so cold, it's awful tough to build roads. They're trying to build one now from British Columbia up through into Yukon, okay? Otherwise, things have to come through either airplanes or by ships when the waters allow you to do so. So you can imagine this probably makes things quite expensive. And you're right, it is very expensive to do that. Very expensive to live there, and accordingly, the salaries try to meet that. It's a very interesting place, but a lot of people don't seem interested in visiting there. But having said that, there is a degree of tourism there. People like to do some hunting up there. And other people are opposed to that happening or taking place. But there we go. I mean, that's what happens with, and these are remote areas. And again, these areas also allow some Inuit and First Nations groups, Inuit people, to live a more traditional lifestyle. But by the same token, you also have issues of severe isolation. You have pockets of deep poverty. So it's a mixed bag up there. Okay, I think I'll cut that short for right now. Well, I didn't cut it short, but as you can see, this went on for a while. So hopefully you have a better feel for what Canada's like, what some of the people might do for a living there, and how the provinces are similar and different from each other. Okay, I'm going to try to stop this there, unless Zoom has already stopped me. I'm not quite sure. We're going to find out in a second. I guess I can still go. All right, so I'll go ahead and I'll end this, and I thank you for your time, and I look forward to seeing you on August 4th. Take care.